Solopreneurship or freelancing is not to me about making money. It's about giving me the freedom to do the things that I want to do. So it can be doing music, it can be baking bread, it can be just having one day free.
That is Ankit Taneja, a self-described Salesforce solopreneur and also co-lead for the Berlin user group. I'm Josh Birk, your host for the Salesforce Developer Podcast, and here you will hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down and talk with Ankit about his experiences as an entrepreneur and get some tips and tricks from him. But first, we sat down and talk about his early experiences with computing.
Well, I always liked computers. So unlike the 90% of the Indian community or the Indian IT guys who are doing some other kind of engineering and then moving into IT, I always loved computer science. My dad bought me a Pentium 2 in 1996 with Windows 3.1. I deleted the whole thing because I was like, oh, we need more space. I didn't know that system things need space. And so I always loved computer science, and it was a childhood dream to be a computer science scientist because a classmate's father was a scientist, and he went to France and brought chocolates. And I was like, oh, scientists get to go to travel the world because they take part in conferences. So that was like my goal. I like computer science and I want to be a scientist so I can go to conferences and buy chocolates.
And how successful have you been in going to conferences and having chocolates?
Quite successful, actually.
Nice.
So I came to Germany to do my PhD, and I do my master thesis and then probably do my PhD. That was the whole goal. So I did IT forensics. So I'm one of those people who's coming from scientific background into Salesforce world. And I did a nice master thesis on IT forensics. So when you have a crime scene, how to get information out of devices. And my specialty was audio forensics. You can find my paper on Google Scholar.
Nice.
And that's how I was supposed to do PhD. So my master thesis went really well, but it was pretty elongated because we were getting good results. So it went on for 11 months. So I took a break of 6 months in order to decide what should I do my PhD in. And that's when Salesforce came in.
So, because I was about to reframe my next question, because that sounds like a lot of work in a very specialized field. So how did you veer to Salesforce instead of sticking with something like IT forensics?
So doing my master's, I grew more interest in IT security when I was like, security is protecting this stuff. I want to be the best. So what happens when the security is broken? What happens then? So that's why I went to IT forensics. And in 2010, 2011, like forensics was still and developing field, and it's still a developing field. And that time we didn't have so big hard drives. So as I mentioned before, I did my master's, and I took a 6 months break where I was like, oh, now I have to take some time and think what I want to do my PhD in, like what more part of forensics. And I could have worked in a bar, or I went to the university job board and somebody was like looking for someone to learn Apex. And I was like, okay, so Java, Python, what is Apex? Let me meet this person. So I met this person. He showed me Salesforce. I was not at all interested. But then he said, I'm going to pay you double than what a student earns. And I was like, well, looks like we're doing Apex.
And what languages were you working in before that?
So I'm a C guy because audio forensics is basically reading all the bits, making sense of what kind of file it is. Every file has a signature, and then you kind of make sense of what is this file. And then if it's an audio file, then you kind of like MP3 have frame rates, and using the frame, you kind of carve out the whole file. So it's called file carving. And then you have all these chunks, and then you make sense of all those chunks together.
Got it. So you C++ allows you to work with all those nice system level libraries and things like that.
Exactly. Right.
Gotcha. Okay. So then that solidifies one of the binary questions I ask people a lot on the show, which is you walked into the Salesforce ecosystem not knowing what the abbreviation or what the acronym CRM stood for.
Not at all. No chance. Zero. I had no idea this worlds exist. I was like science guy, university student, professors. That was like my realm. I was reading scientific papers.
Now, as you're getting into the Salesforce ecosystem, it looks like you've kind of been a solo entrepreneur like the entire time. Is that correct?
No, not exactly. So I joined this guy as a student programmer. And I was doing it for 6 months. Now, as a scientist, I was always, so I had this curiosity. I'm a curious person. And I was like, well, what is this Apex? And I kind of get into it. And what really attracted me to Salesforce was the governor limits. So back then, you could not do more than 1,000 things in a list. And I was like, well, this is nice because, coming from C, C++, world is your oyster. Do whatever you want. You just need to manage the list and garbage correctly. And I was like, wow. So only 1,000 things in a list. You can only query up to, I don't know, back then was 5 or 10,000 records at a time.
Right.
And being the curious person that I am, I was like, well, this is a nice challenge. And I those 6 months went away quite fast. I gave no thought to my PhD. And the guy said, do you want to build a company with me? Because it looks like you're interested in this. So I said, yes. So we built an ISV. This is where I learned my first entrepreneurship lesson that you can build a very nice technical product, but selling a product is a totally different ball game. So, you can have best engineered things, but if you don't know how to sell to it, then it's not going to work. And secondly, B2B selling is totally different to B2C selling. So I was like 23 at that time and I was making the product and my partner was selling. Long story short, ISV didn't take off as we expected, but we were getting a lot of consulting work because the clients were like, hey, can you help us with this? So we had some success. But it was not like paying bills. So the clients were like, hey, can you help us with consulting? And we were like, sure. And slowly kind of the consulting business took off and the ISV business did not take off. Moved to Berlin. Berlin is like the freelance capital of Europe, Got bit by the solopreneurship bug, met other solopreneurs or freelancers over there.
Yeah.
And then I kind of told my partner, hey, the startup is not taking off as expected. It was a nice journey of 3 years, but now I want to go on my own. And then I switched to solopreneur.
Got it. Okay. Well, I want to talk more about freelancing and being a solo entrepreneur. But speaking of Berlin, I also want to call out your work with the local user group. How did you get involved in the user group? And now you're currently the leader of the user group as well.
Right. So coming back again from the scientific community, you have conferences and you have like get-togethers and people will come together and talk to each other. And as I was getting into the community, so I started with Salesforce in 2012. Then I was, when you had a problem, you were reading blogs of, Keir Bowden or, Abhinav Gupta, all these people. And then slowly you realized, oh, there are user groups or something. So then I was like, okay, there must be one in Berlin. So I got in touch with, I don't even remember who was at that time, Sophia or someone. And I said, hey, in Berlin, I want to start something.
Yeah.
And they said, well, you already have a group and these are the ex-leaders. Just get in touch with them. So then I got in touch and it's me and Alexis. And we were like just 4 people initially just coming together every month, eating pizza, drinking beer, talking Salesforce. And now it's like 40 people doing the same thing.
Nice. I like this constant thread in your life of being motivated by conferences and candy. If I'm including beer as a candy food group, of course.
Of course. I'm in Germany, mate.
Right. And now the question I'm asking basically anybody involved with organizing that community, how has organizing events and groups been like in the pandemic?
It's been tricky.
Yeah.
So we just had like the EMEA CGL hours like on 2 days ago on Wednesday, and it's been tricky. And particularly for me also, like I am now part of so many calls and this so meeting like this is just more like a webinar. The real thing that happened at the networking events was you met someone, somebody gave a talk. We always had an open forum. So there was like question answers and things went for 40 minutes. Add beer to that, 60 minutes.
Right.
Or, people took those conversations outside. And of course, in Zoom, you can break out into personal rooms and, you can have your private chat rooms, but it's not the same. So I'm also very wary of organizing just the user group meeting for the sake of it. So that's why we just did one in July, which was like TDX Global Gathering. And then I didn't do anything. Now here in Berlin, we have a tradition. We have Christmas markets. I don't know if you know because you're in the US.
Is
So
that like the marketplace that gets put up in like a park or something?
Right. So
Okay.
every area, every city have their Christmas markets, and there are
Mhm.
different themes, and you drink something called as a glue wine, which is like warm wine. It's tasty. You need to get used to it, but it's tasty. And it has like cinnamon in it and star anise
Mhm.
and all of that stuff. So we always have our annual meetup over there, dev and admin combined, like all Berlin groups combined. So I just posted today that let's do a virtual Weihnachtsmarkt or a Christmas market one. But
Got
that's
it.
because,
Nice.
everybody at home drinks some glue wine, and, just it's been like 4 or 5 months.
Got it. Nice. So bringing it back to freelancing, it's just how long have you been freelancing with Salesforce customers now?
2014, 2016, 6+ years. And
Gotcha.
if you count the startup before, like it was just me and him, and then I was managing some outsourced people in India. So it was also, I also count that in my experience because I was going to client and doing that. It's just that money was not coming to me. It was going to a company, and then I was getting like a salary.
Right. It was kind of like freelancing with an ISV side.
Right.
Gotcha. So you've never gone into like the office lifestyle, so to speak. What's attractive about being a solo freelancer / entrepreneur? Like, what are some pros of that particular lifestyle?
So again, if you listen to my podcast, I talked to Amnon and Enos about it. Solopreneurship or freelancing is not to me about making money. It's about giving me the freedom to do the things that I want to do. So it can be doing music, it can be baking bread, it can be just having one day free. Freelancing, so if you look at other freelancers in the ecosystem like Amnon or Enos, Amnon has his ISV, which he's running on the side. Enos is producing books, courses. I don't know, this woman is producing a lot of stuff, card game. So freelancing is about right now utilizing your skills, working the hours that you want to work, and then having the freedom to do the things that you really want to do or you're passionate about.
Gotcha.
So that's freelancing to me.
Nice. And then on the flip side, what are some cons or some of the challenges?
The challenges of freelancing are, well, initially it can be a little tricky to find work, and the challenge is saying no to work. Like sometimes clients are throwing big money at you and you're like, okay, I don't want to do this because, I have my limitations.
Right.
And I have been burnt out myself where I was like, initially when I started, I was just taking 3 or 4 projects because you were just looking at the hours and the dollars. And then later on you realized, holy crap, I have all this money, but I don't have time to spend. So that's like, you need to learn how to set those boundaries and not overgo them.
Well, that's interesting because that feels like a fairly distinct spectrum then, because if some of the benefits of freelancing is that you have kind of flexibility and power over your own hours and how your week is set up, but on the flip side, if you can kind of get consumed by that, then you lose one of the key benefits of being a freelancer.
Exactly. And at some point I didn't have a home and I didn't have an office. Everything was just intermingled. So I was waking at crazy hours. I was working at crazy hours in the middle of the night. Then I was sleeping. Then in the evening, a friend says, hey, you want to get a beer at the bar? Sure. Then you come back home. And as an IT person, because you're not facing the customer every day, especially if you're a developer, you get your task. Now you have to write this class or feature for the next 2-3 days. You can plan around it. So I lost kind of that work and home thingy. So it took a while.
That's really interesting because that is almost word for word some of the advice that I've given people who have now found themselves in remote working, which is if you lack distinction in both your physical life as well as kind of like your, the structure of how you're approaching work, it's really easy to get burned out and stressed out because you don't have anywhere to, you have no comfort zone. Everything's work at that point. Have you found other things that you do to kind of control your day-to-day to ease that work-life balance?
It might sound a little corny, but I have a girlfriend and she kicks my butt if I'm working more than 7, or if on the weekend I said, hey, honey, I have to do this. She's like, no, it's our time. So that helps.
Nice. Okay, I have to be very careful with this segue here, but I miss having a dog. Because my dog insisted that I take breaks and go, I always say cats are great if you want to stay inside and like, curl up on a couch. Dogs are
Right.
great if you actually want to go get sunshine and some exercise. And
Absolutely.
it's like, I miss that forcing factor in my life.
Right.
Back when I was a consultant, we would work with contractors and freelancers. And like, I remember one guy, we constantly tried to hire him full time. And he was like, no, because he was basically a Java developer. And he's like, Salesforce is so niche that I am making too much money writing Apex. And basically he's like, there's no way you can afford me. Do you think that math still holds true, that Salesforce is kind of like this niche ecosystem where it's like you have a specialized skill and therefore you can kind of edge out more money, more pay per hour than like a standard Java developer?
That's a very good question. Not anymore, to be honest, because 3 or 4 years ago, when Salesforce was still new, I mean, it was not new, it was 16 years old back then.
Sure.
But in the last 5 years, it has just been like a hockey stick. And then there are more people coming in. Mm-hmm. So now these days, that's why I made also the course, because for experienced people like myself, like we have that experience on our resume. So that speaks for us. But for anybody else, who's just starting out, it's not as simple as it was for us. Secondly, for us also now, there is cutthroat competition. I mean, at the end of the day, it's business. So, now there are new people coming in, which are offering 10, 20, they're working at 20, 30% less than what I would say I would charge or the other person charge. But you also see that in the quality of work. So there's a lot of code that comes your way, and then you're like, holy Jesus, like who did this? Why did this?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Because I think it's actually kind of turned into a constant joke on the pod that like developer purgatory is your own code from a few years ago. Yeah, but you're probably in a situation where you have to deal with somebody else's code a lot more frequently. So I don't know if that's your purgatory. It might be one of the circles of hell or something like that, though. How often do you find yourself fixing somebody else's code?
I just recently I started something which is basically that, and I texted a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, that's your niche. You have specialized in that. Look at the positives." And I'm like, "Thanks, mate. Cheers. Now go and." Yeah.
I feel you. And I remember distinctly, I was part of like a 3-man software team for a while. Right. And I was trying to get our pages to work across like Internet Explorer and all this stuff. And I just went into like this epic Microsoft rant. And my partner was like, Josh, you realize if all of that stuff worked easily, you wouldn't have a job here, right? Like, yeah. Right. That's how they hire us.
That's right. But one thing I want to say, see, I also learned with time. I have written triggers in 2012 when I was starting, where the whole logic is in the trigger, and there was an upsert trigger and there was an insert trigger. I was still working for the same client. 2 years later, I got better. I told the client, hey, now I know better. We need to have these handler classes. This is not right. The client said, no, don't change the running system. It's working. I'm not going to pay you extra hours. So even when I left the client, I made a ticket about technical debt so that the next guy who's coming in, or next guy or girl who's coming in, looks at that ticket and says, hey, here is the ticket, and not just like, what is this? So I at least expect that. And when you're in the market, then, I always say to people, leave the org as you would like to inherit it. Even if you have created some technical debt, mention it. There's no shame in that. We all learn,
You were a better friend of future developers than I was. I think the extent of my documentation for my descendants was I would write in a comment, this is the hackiest thing I've done all day, just as a warning.
Right. I mean, the code that I inherited recently is also contract C is equal to this and account A is equal to this. And I'm like, well, there we go again. It's 2020. What can get worse?
Right. Okay, so let's start talking about some specifics. I want to get into freelancing. What are some tools that I absolutely should have?
First of all, a project management tool. So don't live and get yourself, if nothing, get a free Trello board. Like my life is on Trello.
Oh,
So
really?
that's very important to have like a project management tool so you can schedule it around. Second is time management tool. So again, as a freelancer, I do not recommend anybody to work 5 days because it's also about administrative tasks like your invoicing, tax, all of that. Then you need to spend some time on marketing. I mean, treat it as business. This is where people also lack because most of the times freelancers fail because they don't have follow-on projects. Like they get this big project and then there's nothing.
Right.
So you need to market it. You need to keep oiling that machine so that you have a good pipeline. Yeah. So having time management tool, setting aside time, like it's not a tool, but a project management tool and time management tool to set aside time for stuff, billing tool. Yeah. That would be, I would say, the tools.
Well, and so give me a little bit more detail on that, because as a solo act, you're the whole deal. You're marketing. Right. You're your own HR department. You are your backroom business office. Right. So how do you divide, like roughly, how do you divide up your time? Is it like daily, weekly, monthly to get all of those tasks done to keep the business up and running?
I mean, it's case by case basis. I mean, I cannot say for everyone, but at least for me right now, I can say, so my current schedule is I work 3 days a week for a client. And as you know, I do a podcast, Forcepreneur. So Thursday is marketing day. Now on Thursday, I'm either recording a podcast or I'm editing a podcast. And if I don't have anything, then I'm writing an article or doing something. So I have set that Thursday as like a marketing day. And it's also like, how do you call it? Context switching, like in your brain. Like when I'm working for a client and I'm doing like custom fields and flows, I cannot think about top 5 ways to be a freelancer. So I have Thursdays for that.
Got it.
And then Friday is just, if any client work is left or if any of those marketing work is left, then that comes into my Friday. Or doing like I'm single, I don't have a family right now. So I just you don't have that much of taxation work too. Like when you have a family, you might have a lot of bills to file and stuff like that. So Fridays is just also, anything that seeps in. And again, as I'm a hobby programmer, so I made this job board, blazenewtrail.com, or like a Blitz, a Salesforce style resume. So I keep having something, go to GitHub, you will find something that you'll be like, oh, nice, let me do this.
Nice. Now, here in the States, when I was freelancing briefly, I had what's called a DBA license, or doing business as license. And basically like legitimizes my business name as something distinct from like my own name. And then you can also be a bit fancier and do like an LLC or limited liability so that, your corporation has a distinct legal aspect. Like, I don't know how that works in Germany, but talk to me about kind of the importance of having like that level of setup to kind of protect you as an individual.
Right. So, again, in my course, I talk about that, like either in a nutshell, if you talk US or, EMEA or APAC, you're either a single person company or you are a limited liability company with single person behind it. Like those are, if you break it down, that's 2 parts to it. When you are a sole proprietor, then you are responsible for everything that happens in the company. And if you do something wrong, if customer sues you, all your assets are available to the court. So if you have a house and everything, if you have a limited liability company, then you're behind that company and your assets are protected. So if someone sues the company, then the company gets sued, but your assets are protected. But again, this is like in a nutshell or an overview. I mean, there are more complications in the middle.
Right.
What happens in Germany is for sole proprietorship, Germans love insurances. So there is something called as a liability insurance that I have. Okay. So basically, and I have like a Rechtsschutzversicherung, which is like a lawyer. I have a lot of insurances, mate. Germans love insurances. I even have a bicycle insurance, and it paid. My bike got stolen and I got everything covered.
Nice.
Yeah, it's €2 a month.
Nice.
Yeah. So I have this liability insurance protection. So if anything happens, so I am not registered as a limited liability company until now because I didn't know about it before. And then I just started like this, and then I continued when I was like, how do I protect myself? So I have this insurance. So if anything goes wrong, I'm working with client data. And if my system gets hacked and their data gets leaked, how do I protect my back?
Yeah, because it's better to lose the office and not the house.
Right. So it's important to have, so check out in your areas. I'm pretty sure every country has an insurance or something for that, or figure out. So it's either sole proprietorship or limited liability.
Right. With the asterisk, neither of us are lawyers. We're not providing legal advice.
Please, yes.
We're telling you go seek legal advice, and that these are valid concerns. Right.
This is the money which is well spent. You will sleep so good at night if you have a nice tax lawyer. Like I have a tax lawyer, and I'm from India, so I'm a little cheeky. So I went to him and I was like, "Hey, can we do this? I bought this nice 65-inch TV. Can I do this?" And he's like, "No, no,
nice.
Righteous man."
Which is. So I would also add on at least my side, my experience was have not just a good accountant, but like a moral one. Cause like the small shop I worked with for a while, like our boss, like just brought in like his personal lawyer to like, not lawyer, accountant to kind of like tell us what we could expense, which seemed like everything, which actually worried us a little bit.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. So I have a very moral guy, and
nice.
I sleep better at night.
Nice. Okay, so once I have all of these things, I need those other things that are called, what are they again? Customers. And by the way, this is why I fled freelancing, because oddly enough, the Grain Silo Trade magazine here in Central Illinois wasn't enough to pay my bills as my single only paying client. So as a freelancer, how do you go about finding customers and maintaining your customer base?
Yeah, this is like the $1 million question, right? Like I guess this asked 1,000 times. So how to find those customers? Well, basically, as I said before, like how does Salesforce find customers, or how does any company find customers? Marketing. You go ahead and you advertise your work. How do you market? Well, in a nutshell, you produce some kind of content, audio, video, blog. So how does somebody know that you can do the work? Like you are 1 in the 7 billion. How does someone know you can solve Apex problem? So you need to have some kind of network. So how I started getting my work is basically, again, so we were doing the Berlin Developer User Group meeting. We were 4 or 5 people. And of course, we had pizza and beer, but it was serious stuff. So nobody, and I don't know how people say they don't have content to produce every month. Like in the last 4 weeks, I've definitely learned something that I can put it on in a 20-minute presentation and put it. And writing pseudocode is not that hard, but somehow. So this is how I got started. I was always doing presentations at the Berlin Developer User Group, not to gain customers, but just to attract people. And when I was showing that, then people started coming to me because I did a presentation on, let's say, Service Cloud integration with Heroku. And they were like, "Hey, we have a similar use case. Would you like to help?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, why not?" And I was just helping for free. But at some point it was like, "Mate, this is like 5 days of work." And they were like, "Yeah, what would you like to charge?" And I was like, okay. Yeah. So you need to produce some kind of content. You need to have some kind of identity. Otherwise, you need to differentiate yourself, just like companies are doing.
Right.
So that's what I'm, again, focusing in my course about, like how to go ahead. Now, you need to identify your niche. Like today, if you're blogging about Sales Cloud, you have a long way to go. I mean, go to Bob Buzzard. He wrote a Bible on it.
Right. Exactly. Well, then that's true. Like it's not just content, but don't tread over trodden ground. Like it's content which is new and interesting to people.
Now look at Narendra Singh. Like look at Nat07. He took external services and is going with it. So it's not like it's end of the world. Just look with the other thing is, Josh, that I want to say, people want things to be served them on a platter. Freelancing is not that. It's hard work. It's not like, I'm getting 90 euros an hour, No, it's hard work, mate.
Right. Well, and then going kind of back to your anecdote where they're like, how much do you want to charge? How do you figure out that number? Like, how do you know what the right rate that's going to be putting money in your pockets while also being attractive to a client?
Mate, this is rocket science. I cannot tell you this. This is like this big question, like how much is the right money? It's simple math. So what you do is you go ahead and see how much do you need in a month. You add your rent, you add your insurances or mortgage, whatever you have. You add the groceries, you add the things that you want to do. You go to the bar, toilet paper, all these things that you need. You add all of that. Then you get a sum. It's your monthly thing. The other thing is you see how many hours you want to work. So I work 24 hours a week, like 3 days. So I go ahead and then add those hours. Then you then you take that first sum, divide it by the number of hours. Then you see how much tax you have to pay. So I am single and I'm in the highest tax bracket. Thank you, Germany. And so then you add that tax on top of that. And then you add a little bit of buffer. So I calculated for me, at least right now, I don't have a very high-fi living standard. For me, it comes around 55 to 60 euros an hour over here. Now, that's like the simple rate calculation, right? This is the money that I need in the world in a month. This is the hours that I'm willing to work. Boom. It's math. And on top of that, with the number of years, you can add premium. Now, that's more variable and depending upon your experience and the niche that you have and the project that you have. So, that can play. But this is the basic science of calculating rate.
Nice. First of all, I think I have to have you do my budget because just what you just described is far more detailed than I've gone into for years. But on a follow-up to that, how do you see the budget work? So that's kind of like on a micro scale, like what's the hourly rate you're going to pitch to the customer? How do you structure your budget like over a period of time, kind of more on a macro scale?
Right. So if you want those micro thingies, you can take my course and there is an Excel which comes with it. So I've done it for you.
Okay.
And secondly, on a macro level, so what do you mean by macro level? Can you detail a little more, like all the...
Like how do you plan month to month?
Yeah. So that is like your monthly expense, and then you go ahead and extrapolate it to a year. Then again, in that sheet, I've also calculated how many vacations I want. So you kind of give your monthly expenses. Then there's also a column for holidays I want. I also take into consideration that I'm going to this dreaming event, that dreaming event, tickets, the time that I'm not working. So you kind of get that. And when you do it for a year or two, you kind of get the idea, okay, this is the amount of money that I need every month to make ends meet. I mean, I'm also not going that specific, but I can zoom in and, look at that and just be generous with it. So
right.
I put in 1,000 euros. How much do I put? I put 300 euros every month for vacation when I'm not going. And this year we didn't go anywhere on vacation. Well,
gotcha.
That's wrong. We went once, but yeah. just in Germany, like inside Germany. Was
I think these days vacation kind of comes in quotes anyway. So I hear you. Do you recommend people keeping things in the coffer in case they get into some lean months?
Exactly. So the golden rule of freelancing is, please listen to this. Save 6 months of money in the bank account. So as soon as you start working, start saving the money and so you calculate how much you need in a month, like your gross, not net. And then you start saving that, and you start to save for 1 month, then you save for 3 months, then you save for 6 months. When COVID hit this year in April, I was not at all worried. I mean, I was worried what will happen with the world, but financially, I have money saved for at least a year. So if I'm out of work for 1 year, I don't have to worry and I can maintain the same lifestyle. And if I reduce my lifestyle, like eating at home more, which we are anyways doing, I would probably survive 14 or 15 months. I have a very good friend. He has saved it for 2 years, and that guy's driving a big Audi. I can tell you that too. But he's true German. I am now in German, and he's true German. So he has saved for 2 years, and I was like, "Hey, what's up?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm cool for the next 2 years."
Yeah. No, I got financial advice from an old friend of mine, Roger Vidito, and Roger was like, you're like me, and you're kind of chaotic when it comes to stuff. So like, put money in the bank and forget about it. Like just forget that it's there, and then just keep banking it. And then when you need to look at it kind of thing. Right, and it's like that's it's not your money anymore. It's just your savings in case something happens.
Have it in cash. Have it in cash, or again, I'm not giving any financial advice, but we work in IT. You can invest in a very good blue chip stock like Salesforce or Apple, or something that you think will not crash.
Right.
So something like that.
Nice. So speaking again of COVID and the pandemic, how has that affected like how you interact with your clients? Like, has it changed a lot because you kind of don't have that, face-to-face relationship, or has technology basically just always been there and you haven't shifted that much?
No, it has made a difference. I can tell that. So I always say working at a new client is like starting a new relationship, when you started with someone. So you need to understand each other's, idiosyncrasies, and you kind of try to say, okay, how is this person behaving? And you kind of build the expectation. They kind of build the expectation how to work with you, and what do they expect from you, and what do you expect from them in terms of requirements. Right. And, so it's kind of building that relationship. And it's a little bit easier when you're in the office. So if you have a question, you can always ask them. Of course, Slack and IM and Google Chat and all these things are there. But me and my new client, because I just started 2 weeks ago, we also had this idea. We just leave our webcams on for 8 hours so that I just look, but then it was very weird. Don't do that. Yeah. Don't. With a new client whom you don't know, you're welcoming them in your living room.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who works in an office, and they've gone remote, and she's like, my manager has everybody have their webcam on for 6 to 8 hours straight. And I'm like, what? That sounds like hell. Like I don't want to be worrying about what I'm touching my face or my staring off into the sunset for a little while. I should be allowed to stare off in the sunset for a little while.
Exactly. So, yeah. And home office is anyways no pants day, so you don't know. But this was not working out. Like, you're putting your finger in the nose, and then the guy's like
yeah. And it's us. I remember a couple of times, even back in the old days, I would start like a Google Hangout, and the other guy was already there, but they didn't know I was there, and so they're just like coding and staring into the screen, and they can't hear me, and I'm like, that's a really weird experience. I wouldn't want that for 8 hours straight. I don't think it would actually make me feel better about the work environment in any way.
Right. So coming back to your point, so what we are doing right now is, or what I have proposed is that we do one call in the beginning of the day where we just set the tone. So we do one call on Monday where we just set the tone for the week. And then ad hoc, I write to them if I have a question. So he replies on Slack. And if I need more explanation, then I say, I want to talk to you. And grab a meet, with time, and then we probably do it at the end of the day. And then on Wednesday, we do one kind of midday talk where it's like, okay, this was done, and this is what, because I'm also learning new thing about the org, and sorry to say, but it's not a good documented org. So there are a lot of, can I tell you what I've seen new? So as a freelancer, I have seen so much funny code, like I can write a book about it. So I've finally seen people naming custom fields in German. So let's say pin code, Postleitzahl. So usually people will call it pin code in English, but they will not use translation workbench. They will call it just Postleitzahl, which is like the wrong way to do. Here, they have given it the German name and the German API name. And I'm like, we are back in 60s. We don't use English. So I'm writing code and I'm using German names for stuff. Now it is good because I know German, but Jesus, I was like, wow.
Looking at it the first time. Yeah, I can imagine.
And there's a new org, it's just made in 2017. So I was like, wow. I wish who did this. I want to go and, just shake his hand. Nice. Amazing.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your podcast. Forcepreneur. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Right.
So why did you get into podcasting, and just kind of give me the elevator pitch for the podcast itself?
Right. So I always, again, I was but I was planning to start another Salesforce company, which is now on hold because of Corona. And I was also curious to learn more about how business happens in the Salesforce ecosystem, and what better way to speak to different entrepreneurs. Now, since I'm speaking to them, I just thought maybe I just press a record button and then share it with everyone, because there are a lot of people who want to start business, and how does business work? Even if we are talking about classic Salesforce consulting work, which is the 80% of business, let's say, that happens in the ecosystem. So, I spoke to Shell Black or Nina Gupta or Jason Atwood, and that was the whole motivation to learn how does business work, and what are the things to do, and how is it different to start a Salesforce enterprise than any other enterprise. Because as with governor limits, Salesforce has its own.
Right. We have our own nuances. Yes, we do.
I finally used a German word. Yeah, exactly.
Nice. And that goes out weekly?
No, I'm right now doing monthly, but because I first wanted to test the waters and see if people like it, and I didn't want to stress myself, and and now
I hear you.
Yeah, and now I have and initially, I mean, I thought it would be easy. Like the first 10 minutes I edited, it took me like 2 hours to edit 10 minutes because I was listening to things 10 times.
Yes.
Now I take 2 to 3 hours to finish editing an episode, start to finish, with volumes, intro, outro, everything.
Yeah,
so,
no, I hear you. Sometimes it takes me a good 5 minutes to get that 10-second intro into this podcast. So I feel you.
Right.
Now, we've mentioned it a couple times, and I think through the time travel of podcasting, it will have been out by the time we release this. But tell me about the course that you are producing.
Right. So a lot of people ask me, how do you do freelancing? Or, because I'm not, because how are you doing freelancing? Because you're doing it successfully for so many years. And, I also get a lot of work. So I help other people get work. And so I put this all together in a course where basically, so first of all, I'm not teaching how to get rich. That's not the idea of this course.
Gotcha.
Secondly, the course is not for people who have less than 3 years of experience in Salesforce. So the idea is, when you are a freelancer, you are a specialist. Like clients are hiring you because they believe you're a specialist and you can do things fast, and they're looking for quick but solid solutions, and they cannot afford a consulting firm. More or less. So the course is exactly about that. Who's a freelancer? What kind of different freelancing models are there? There's developer, there's admin, there's tech lead, there's a solopreneur like myself who's a combination of all of them. And then, how to get about setting up business and how to ensure that you always have a running business, so this marketing part is very important. Then how to deal with customers. But the whole idea, of course, is about why I'm saying the word solopreneur, because I think the long-term Salesforce freelancer looks like someone who can do the admin job, who can do the consultant job, and who can also do the dev job. So you go to the client, get the requirements, break it down into chunks, do it yourself, do the documentation, hand it over.
Got it.
That's like the sweet spot.
And that's our show. Now, the podcast that Ankit hosts is available over at forcepreneur.com. The course that he has been describing should be available at learn.forcepreneur.com. And Ankit has graciously given the listeners of this podcast a 10% coupon code in the form of SFPOD10. Once again, that code is SFPOD10. And of course, all of those links in that coupon code will be described in our show notes. Now, before we go, I did ask after Ankit's favorite non-technical hobby. And well, it's a little technical. It turns out he's kind of an AV guy.
Music. So I have electronic drums, and I'm trying to play drums. And right now I'm getting into video.
Cool. What kind of video?
So editing my course, but now I'm also getting into,
gotcha.
So now I'm looking at Cassie Neistat and all these people, and I'm like, well, I can do some funky stuff.
We'll keep an eye out to see if Ankit does any funky stuff with video. I want to thank him for some great conversation and information. Of course, as always, I want to thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about this podcast, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes, see the show notes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.